Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We'll get started now, inshallah. Right, we are running a bit late. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Nabiyil Kareem wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Okay, before we begin, I thank all of you for attending. And inshallah, this is going to be every second Wednesday that we'll get together to discuss some contemporary theology topics. So the purpose of this series is for us to have open and honest discussions about topics that we tend to shy away from, right? The controversial topics, the questions that our teenagers are asking, the questions that our youth are asking, the questions that are driving some people out of the fold of Islam, right? This is a very it's a very hot topic in a way that most of us, when this topic comes up, we just go quiet. Right? We don't know what to say. And doing so has been very damaging to our community. It's been very damaging that we don't address these topics. So today's session is both a comprehensive look at the root causes of this problem, and at the same time it's an introduction. It's both comprehensive and introductory at the same time. And initially, we advertised this as curbing the spread of atheism. I wanted to change the title, so I just changed it here anyway, to curbing the spread of doubts about Islam. And the reason that I changed the title is that it's not atheism alone that's the problem, right? It's doubts about Islam. Because doubts about Islam, for some people, it will lead to atheism. For some people, it may lead to becoming agnostic. For others, they may lead to them becoming munafiqun, where they are outwardly Muslim but inwardly not. And we want to solve all those problems. We want to tackle only atheism. We want to make sure that people's iman is strong, that people's foundation is strong. So therefore, we want to get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is not atheism. The root of the problem are these doubts about Islam and where they come from. And today's discussion is going to be more on the psychology and the social aspects that lead people to doubt Islam rather than the actual aqidah or fiqh issues. And the reason for this is that one thing we need to understand is it is very strange to have a phenomena of young people leaving Islam. It's very strange and out of place in Muslim history. From the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam until today, Islam has been the fastest growing religion in the world. And it continues to be. Despite the fact that some people are leaving Islam, despite the fact that there are people today who are more openly murtad, more openly leaving the faith, Islam is still the fastest growing religion in the world. Right? Because for every one who leaves, there are others who convert. And, as I mentioned before, those who convert, they end up having large families and their children and grandchildren all end up being Muslim. Right? While very often those who leave end up not even getting married or having children. So the balance is usually in favor of Islam. And I think one of our problems is that we exaggerate how bad the problem of apostasy has been in our times. Because we are so shocked to see people leaving Islam, we talk about it as if it's every second or third person. But in reality, it's maybe less than 5% of people. Right? Because when it happens, we're all still shocked. It's not like every second cousin or every third person has left Islam. It's not like that. It's a much smaller number. Nonetheless, we want it to be 0%. We want it to be when nobody leaves Islam. We want it to be that we stop this problem and we nip it in the bud. And this problem is bigger in other countries. Specifically in the US, in the UK, in those countries, it's bigger than it is in South Africa. South Africa, we still got some of the foundations right that helped a lot of people to maintain their iman, but we got some of the foundations wrong that led people away. And specifically about atheism, we have to also understand that atheism is unnatural. It is against the fitrah. A human being is not born atheist. No civilization in the history of this world was atheist. It's not something that's passed along generation to generation. Most people whose parents are atheists, they end up converting to some kind of religion. right? The fitrah, the natural beliefs of a human being lead towards Islam. For someone to move away from that towards something as depressing and purposeless and against human nature as atheism, there have to be factors that led them in that direction. There have to be social causes that push them in that direction. So what I'm going to do today is discuss what I think are 6 of the primary social factors that lead people to want to leave this religion. And if we can fix these 6 aspects of our society, then inshallah we will be nipping the problem in the bud. We'll be building a strong foundation of iman for the next generation, so that people wouldn't even think about wanting to leave this religion. And I want to start with a parable to put this into context. Imagine 2 friends, right? 2 friends in the early 20s. One's a young Muslim boy, grew up in a what we would call a Muslim home. So this is a Muslim boy. He grew up. His family never really practiced Islam. Maybe they go for Jummah. They don't eat pork. They don't drink alcohol, right? And that's about all he knows about Islam. He goes to a public school. He goes to a non-Muslim university. He does not go to madrasa. He does not get an Islamic education. His parents are caught up in this dunya. They don't really focus on his Islamic upbringing. He grows up just Muslim by name. And in his 20s, he's in university. His philosophy teacher challenges him. Why do you believe in God? Why are you a Muslim? Why are you following a religion? He doesn't have any answers. And one day, he tells his parents, I'm not a Muslim anymore. His parents are shocked. You're not a Muslim anymore? Why? And he's shocked about his parents being shocked, because his parents weren't practicing Islam anyway. So he doesn't understand what's the big deal. That if you're not praying 5 times a day, if you're not practicing Islam, why are you shocked that I want to leave this religion? That's one side. Let's move on to his friend. Imagine his friend, right? So this is a man who grew up in a home where his father was abusive, violent towards him. And his father often used Islam to justify that violence. And his father kind of forced him to do a lot of things. So he made him, you look at this young man, you say, mashallah, he's a Hafizul Quran, he's got a big beard, he's praying 5 times a day. But the same young man, his father forced him to do all these things. He was beaten up if he didn't learn his hifz. No one ever taught him about the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one ever taught him about loving Allah, about loving Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In all of his life, all he knows and all he associates with his religion is punishment and being forced to do things. So he enters his 20s, he goes to university, and he realizes he's a man now, he can make his own choices. Angry with his parents, angry with his upbringing, he says, I'm not a Muslim anymore. And the society is shocked. The Hafiz of Quran left Islam. What happened? Now with these two parables are stories I have heard in the community, in South Africa, in the US, in the UK, over and over again. These aren't fictional stories. These are stories that are repeated over and over again in our communities. And what do they tell us about the spread of apostasy now in our communities? What do you think this tells us about the spread of apostasy? It's not necessarily linked to intellectual arguments, right? Most of the time, 90% of the cases I have had to deal with of people leaving Islam, there is an emotional aspect to it. There is a trauma related to it. And that's what I want to get to today. That I believe the causes of doubts about Islam are not necessarily intellectual, because Islam agrees with our fitrah. Islam agrees with what's already there in our nature, and it builds upon that. Islam's teachings of the oneness of God, morality, having a purpose in life, the afterlife, akhlaq, adab, all of this, it fits in with the fitrah. For someone to let this go, there must be something that broke him inside. And this is why very often when people are experiencing doubts about Islam, it's not because of a religious reason per se, but because of something else. And the number one reason I found is family. on one of two extremes. Either their family completely neglected teaching them Islam, or their family kind of abused them in the name of Islam, forced Islam on them with beatings and shoutings and forcing them to be, the problem here is some parents want their children to be a perfect waliullah by the age of 15. With no sins, no faults, no mistakes, no room for error. You have to be perfect at school, perfect at Islam by the age of 15, 16. And one mistake and the parents want to disown the child. Now, that kind of emotional abuse breaks a child on the inside. And on the other side, neglecting your child's Islam is just as bad. I mean, I don't want to mention the name, but there's a very famous comedian and Hollywood actor who was born in a Muslim family, and he's not a Muslim anymore. And he says in one of his shows that the reason he's not a Muslim was he was 12 years old or something like that at a friend's party eating pork, and his mom phoned him and told him pork is haram. And that's the first time in his life he ever heard pork is haram, while at a party at a friend's house. And he told his mom, it tastes too good to be haram. And he ended up leaving Islam and becoming a Hollywood actor. But the fact that he didn't even know pork was haram right till that age tells you he had zero Islamic education. His parents didn't bother to teach him a thing. So these are the two sides. And in our community, we have both. We have those who only emphasize on the material world and not on Islam. And then we have those who are, maybe they're sincere, but their method of parenting is so harsh and abusive, it breaks the child on the inside. And in psychology, there is this theory that a person's primary understanding of God comes from their relationship with their parents. Meaning, if someone's parents are kind and merciful and understanding and compassionate and wise, then for a child, that's the image they have of God. And when someone's parents are harsh and violent and mean and judging and unforgiving, then that child grows up believing that God is the same. And so the way we interact with our children shapes the way they think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so it's very, very important that we get the parenting right. And this is really the number one cause. I would say maybe 80 to 90% of the cases I have dealt with, when somebody has left Islam or is on the verge of leaving Islam or stopped practicing Islam, they're angry with their mother or they're angry with their father. Majority of the cases. When you break it down, they are angry with their parent. And what's the point of us then discussing the philosophy behind proofs of the existence of Allah or proofs of prophethood when it's an emotional issue? They need counseling. They need to move past it and separate their relationship with Allah from their relationship with their parents. And that brings us to the second point. By the way, all 6 points are going to be controversial, because these are the things we don't want to talk about, right? But we can't fix the problem if we don't talk about it. So if any of these points hit home, sincerely take it to heart and try to make a change in your life. Don't be offended or upset and think that I'm attacking you. I'm not attacking you. I'm pinpointing things we have done wrong that are having a negative impact on the next generation. And the second problem is our education. 3 problems with our education. Number one, our curriculum is completely outdated. Right? The questions our youth are asking: why is homosexuality haram? We don't address this. How can I prove Allah exists? We don't address this. How can you prove that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the true prophet? We don't address this. The questions they are asking, we are ignoring. Instead, we want to teach them the fiqh of hunting, even though they're probably never going to hunt in their life. We want to teach them the zakah on sheep, even though none of them are ever going to own sheep. Right? We are not teaching them the aspects of our religion relevant to their lives. Instead, we want to teach them things that are relevant to different times and places. Yes, the farmers, they need to learn the fiqh of farming. Hunters need to learn the fiqh of hunting. People growing up in a city, in Durban, don't need to learn either of these things. Right? Everything has its time and its place. The second problem with our education curriculum is there's no room for questions. What happens when you ask a controversial question to most Islamic teachers today? You get shamed, you get shouted at, you get told don't ask questions like that. And sometimes it's not even a controversial question. Sometimes it's just questioning something because you want to learn it deeper. And you know how many times this has happened to me in my life. I remember once when I was first introduced to the concept of the different madhabs of Aqidah, and I asked my teacher, why are there madhabs of Aqidah? My teacher got angry and told me, don't ever ask questions like that. And that question caused me to have doubts. I only discovered the answer 10 years later. Had the teacher just said, I don't know, I'll check it up, and he checked it up and gave me the answer the next day, that would have been much better than telling someone, don't ask questions like that. And by the way, a lot of us do this. A lot of us, when kids ask us, how do we know Islam is true? We say, don't ask questions like that. When you tell a child, don't ask questions like that, the question doesn't go away. He just stops asking you that question. Shaitan will play on that question in his mind until it builds into a doubt. And that doubt can cause him to leave Islam. So we have to have room for questions in our education system. Number 3, we have structural problems in the education system. We have problems at the very basis of how we teach Islam and who teaches Islam and who's qualified to teach Islam. And structural problems, a very basic one I can mention is a lot of our Islamic studies teachers don't have teaching methodology training. They don't know how to develop curriculums. They don't know how to answer questions. They don't know how to make topics relevant to the students. This can be fixed very easily. It can be fixed very easily as long as we are able to recognize the problem and work on it. Instead of just saying, no, there isn't any problem. This is the way we've always done it. This is the way we will always do it. By the way, some people may think that these things go back 1,000 years or 1,400 years. These problems are new. These problems are new. The parenting problem, the education problem, these are only in the past 100 years. If you go back to the Ottoman Empire, if you go back to the Abbasid Empire, you look at how people parented in those days, if you look at the education system of those days, they were much stronger and much better than what we have today. This is a new problem. It's not, when you try to change it, people tell you, oh, you want to change, you want to change the way we teach Islam or parent Islam. You want to modernize things. No, we don't want to modernize things. We want to actually go back to the Sunnah. Because it's not Sunnah to hit a child when they're learning hifz. Show me one hadith that says that. Show me a single hadith where Rasulullah ﷺ ever hit a child. Show me a single hadith where the Prophet ﷺ was teaching people things that was not relevant to them. You will notice that the early Muslims, their methodologies were very different. Now let's move on to the things that are kind of outside our control. Social pressure. We live in a culture that is anti-religion, and where the moral standards are changing every year. What was permissible yesterday is prohibited today. What was immoral yesterday is moral today. And there's a strong pressure, especially in universities, on being anti-religion. Whether you become agnostic or atheist or just a non-practicing Muslim or whatever it is, they don't care as long as you don't take religion seriously. Now we have to understand that everyone's affected by the environment. And in the past, Muslims had a very simple solution to this problem that doesn't exist anymore. We had the Khilafat. We had a Muslim world to live in. Now, we can't say, oh, our forefathers shouldn't have migrated here, because if that was the case, we'd be stuck in India, which has other problems, right? May Allah help them and protect them and keep them safe. So whether we were there or here, there's still going to be problems. Both are lands which are majority non-Muslim. But we have to understand that by choosing to live in a culture that is predominantly anti-religious, where the pressure on people is to doubt everything, where the pressure is to keep changing with the norms, so if you don't adapt to the latest trends when it comes to morality, you are cancelled. You can tweet something in 2010 when it's considered morally fine, and in 2020 they suddenly decide that's immoral, and they'll pull out your tweet from 10 years ago and cancel you. Right? That's how the society has become. Their morality is changing every single year. And what happens is a lot of our youngsters are pressurized. They are pressurized into changing with the norms. And many of them find it easier to just leave Islam altogether in order to fit in. That's a reality, right? Many people just find it easier to leave Islam altogether than to juggle trying to fit in and trying to justify that in terms of their religion. And this isn't something that we can fix easily. Because reality is that young people specifically are always affected by the environment they grow up in. What we could do, we could build young people's confidence. We could give them a better education. We could give them better parenting. We could build their community ties. And all of this can help them to fight off social pressure. But we can't get rid of the social pressure itself. We have to teach them how to deal with it, how to fight it, how to stand firm for what you believe in instead of changing with the times. The fourth reason why people leave Islam is because they want to chase their nafs without feeling guilty about it. And I don't know how many times when you ask someone, about why you left Islam, they're like, Islam doesn't let us, sleep around, or it doesn't let us drink alcohol. Well, that's not a reason to leave Islam, right? You're saying because Islam stops you from immorality, therefore Islam is wrong. That's not a logical argument. That's a nafsi argument. And this is the case for many people. Many people today just want to fulfill their desires without feeling guilty about it. Because as long as they are Muslim, they're going to feel guilty because they have Iman. So they end up just leaving the religion altogether. The good news with this group is I found most of the people who left Islam because they wanted to fulfill their desires, once they experience jahiliyyah, once they experience kufr, once they experience how bad that lifestyle is, they have sincere regrets and return to Islam after 5 or 10 years. The danger is if they pass away during that period, right? But generally, if someone leaves Islam to fulfill their desires, they end up regretting it. Because somewhere down the line, they realize Islam was right and following their desires was wrong. And by the way, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warned about this. Umar radiallahu anhu had said that he worries a time will come when Muslims don't know what it was like to be a disbeliever. And they end up wanting to leave Islam so they can enjoy all the things that non-Muslims are enjoying. He actually foresaw that a time will come where people will grow up and they'll be looking at the non-Muslims saying, they're enjoying themselves and we're so restricted, I want to be like them. Not realizing the harms of what the lifestyle causes. And by the way, fixing this again goes back to education. One of the problems with our curriculums today, we don't focus on why things are haram. If you tell a young person and explain to them the harms of fornication, the harms of adultery, the harms of pornography, the harms of homosexual behavior, the harms of alcohol, the harms of gambling, they're not going to want to do these things because they understand the rational, logical harms of these things. The problem is we just tell them it's haram without explaining why. And this is how our curriculum needs to change. That when we teach people that something is haram, we have to explain to them why. And we live in a time where you don't even need to explain it theoretically. We have statistics and proof all around us about why these things are haram. Because the people who live these lifestyles are miserable. They are miserable. Because these lifestyles are just following your desires. It leads to depression. It leads to heartbreak. It leads to loneliness. It leads to addiction. It leads to feeling purposeless. It destroys a person. And they just need to look at that and say, I don't want that. Islam has protected me from that. So again, the solution is to go back to changing our education system. The fifth problem that causes people to doubt the religion or leave the religion is a spiritual crisis. A spiritual crisis, a lack of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and righteous people. Very often, young people will come to you with questions about Islam. They'll say, why does Islam allow this? And you'll give them an answer. Say, okay, but why does Islam allow that? And you give them an answer. They'll say, okay, but why did the Prophet do this? Eventually, you have to realize that it's not those specific questions that cause them to doubt Islam. They're using it to cover a deeper issue. Very often, the doubts begin when there's no connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When there's no Iman. It starts, for example, when someone stops praying 5 times a day. When someone stops going to the masjid. When someone stops observing hijab. When somebody stops doing good deeds that they were already doing. That's when it begins. That's when they open the door for shaitan to put waswasa in their mind. That's when they open the doors for these doubts to creep in. On the other hand, you will never find someone who is a pious, practicing Muslim sincerely who ends up leaving Islam. Why? Because if you've ever in your life experienced an answered dua, or a miracle, or a true dream, or even the sweetness of faith, or that iman in the rush you get from Ramadan or the Hajjud or any of these acts of ibadat, you can have no doubts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can have no doubts about Islam being the true religion because you have experienced it. And this is why many of the ulama say the best proofs of Islam are not rational proofs. They are experiential proofs. They are things that you experience. That feeling you get when you are in sajda at the time of the Hajjud, you can't explain that to anyone. And that's why in the past, when you look at the Sahaba and the early Muslims, they didn't go around handing out pamphlets to people about Islam. People literally just observed Muslims. They saw the barakah of Islam. They saw the miracles of the Sahaba. They saw the impact of Islam, how it changed people's lives. They saw all of these things. And that is what attracted them to Islam. It was experiencing Islam in action. And that's why when there was a Khilafat, Islam was growing. No matter how weak the Khilafat was, Islam was always growing. Because you could go to a Muslim town, meet pious Muslims, live with them, have a meal with them, stay in their house for a few nights, and experience Islam. Islam is something to be experienced. Like one of the strongest proofs that the Quran is from Allah. Last year we went through all of the rational proofs that the Quran is a miracle. But still, one of the strongest proofs that the Quran is from Allah is the impact it has on our hearts. That you can recite Quran beautifully to someone who doesn't understand a single word of it, but it hits them in the heart. That's something to be experienced. And very often, people who are dealing with doubts about the religion, they are experiencing a spiritual crisis. Their hearts are disconnected from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this goes back to either parents not teaching them Islam at all, or resentment towards religion because of the way someone treated them, or just the fact that we don't focus on tazkiyatun nafs when it comes to our youth. Think about it, we don't focus on purification of the soul when it comes to young Muslims. We only focus on fiqh. If you look at our Islamic studies curriculum for young Muslims, it's just fiqh. There's no purification of the soul. There's no connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no understanding Allah is al-Wadud, Allah is al-Rahman, Allah is al-Rahim, Allah is al-Ghafur. We don't talk about these things. We don't connect them with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's just, this is halal, this is haram, this is makruh, this is makruh tahrimi. It's just rules. The spiritual part of the religion is gone. And it's that spirituality that hits the heart and causes iman to fill the heart. And so going back to being spiritual, to being people who experience this religion, that is the next step to stopping this. The final cause of doubts is community problems. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to feel like they are part of a society, part of a community. And too often we alienate certain people from our community. And when people feel alienated from the Muslim community, they look for other communities to accept them. They look for other communities to be a part of. And very often, this opens the doors to them leaving Islam. And there are many community or ummah level problems that affect the iman of the youth. So for example, we have on the global level terrorism, right? That they see these movements like ISIS and they think that's Islam. And they don't want to be associated with these movements. And because they don't have a proper education of Islam, they end up thinking that this is Islam and they end up having doubts about the religion. Or they see the weakness of the Muslim lands. That the Muslim lands are today amongst the weakest and the poorest and the most oppressed of lands. And they think, how can this be the true religion if it doesn't have prosperity? Now that's not a good way of thinking, but it's the way many youth think. But that's on a global level. On a local level, it gets much more personal. So earlier today, one of you messaged me to ask if ladies can attend, right? And that reminded me of this problem, the community level problems. That very often our sisters feel excluded from the community. that they don't have access to Islamic education, they don't have access to the masjid, they don't have access sometimes to scholars to go and ask them their questions. And this makes them feel excluded. And the same with the youth, because as a community, too often we have this emphasis on being perfect. So when a young man wants to start going to the masjid and he's got some tattoos and he's got an earring and his beard is shaven off and he walks into the masjid, what happens? In too many of our masjid, he gets kicked out. But who needs to be in the masjid most? He needs the masjid. He needs that environment. He needs to reconnect with Allah. We are depriving him of that. We need to meet people where they are and show them the way back to Allah. One of our biggest problems today in this community specifically, it may not apply to other communities in the world, but here specifically, is that if you don't fit somebody's idea of a perfect practicing Muslim, they treat you as if you're not even Muslim. And if people are treating you as if you're not even Muslim, for many of our youth, that will drive them out of the fold of Islam. I mean, I've even heard parents say, "Oh, my son stopped praying Salah. I don't think he's a Muslim anymore." That's a huge jump. That's a huge jump. You're making takfir of your son before even counseling him or making dua for him. You're already making takfir of your own son. And then the community as well. Like, some people expect every young Muslim man to be in kurta and topi full time, and I think that's what a practicing Muslim boy looks like. And if you don't do that, you're not a good Muslim, or you're not even a Muslim. And then we have the takfir, where every group's considering every other group to be out of the fold of Islam. This is breaking our youth. This is breaking our youth. There are so many young people who don't want anything to do with the masjid, anything to do with Islamic studies, anything to do with lectures, because that's the Islam they've experienced. It's just hatred and anger and judgment. And where's the road back to Allah? And this goes back to parenting as well. I always tell parents that your children, when they are teenagers and young adults, they are going to do stupid things. They are going to make mistakes. They are going to fall into minor sins. Inshallah, they won't fall into major sins, but that might happen as well. How you react is most important. We have cases where parents will react to a minor sin as if it's kufr. They will react to a minor sin. Their son was looking at the girl as if he became a kafir. You have a teenage son, that's going to happen. Instead of being so reactionary, how many of us actually teach our children istighfar? How many of us teach our children tawbah? How many of us tell our son, you know what? If you catch yourself looking at the girl in the wrong way, turn your eyes away and say astaghfirullah. How much better is that than to shout at them and scream at them and act as if they've left the fold of Islam? But we don't do this. Instead, we break them instead of helping them. So let's go over some practical solutions quickly, and then we'll open the floor to Q&A. And by the way, this is just a introduction to this topic, inshallah. Right? We'll dive into the specific things that the young people are bringing up in later lectures in the series. But number one solution: our parenting style has to change to meet the challenges of our time. I think it was Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu who said that don't raise your children the way you were raised, because they are growing up in a different generation from you. He said this to the Sahaba. He told the Sahaba, don't raise your children the way you were raised. Because think about it, the younger Sahaba were raised in Medina while the Prophet ﷺ was alive. In that land, in that environment. Ali radiallahu anhu's followers are raising their children 20 years later, in a time where those children have never seen the Prophet ﷺ, in a land where the Muslims had civil war with each other. Two very different times. You're not going to have the same parenting methodology. How much more does that apply to our times? Our children are growing up in a completely different world from us. I mean, my kids can't even imagine a time before YouTube and before Google. They can't imagine it. Right? There's like a world without internet doesn't exist today. The internet has been around longer than the new generation. And they have access to information and knowledge at a young age that we didn't have access to our entire lives, both the good and bad thereof. How do we handle this? We can't use the same parenting methods that worked 20 or 30 years ago. Maybe 50 years ago, it worked to hit a child. Or maybe it worked. I don't think it works in the 21st century. It's not haram technically, But our parenting methods, we have to focus on what's going to have the best impact on this generation. And I don't think that works in this day and age and this culture. We have to find ways to improve as parents. And that means, for example, having a kind of relationship with your children where they can ask you questions. Where they're not afraid to ask their parents, how do we know Islam is true? And you'll sit down together and you'll have a conversation about it. And if you don't have the knowledge to have the conversation about it with them, guess what? You have YouTube. You can watch a video about it together. You have a relationship with your children where you'll worship Allah together. Have a relationship with your children where you openly discuss the vices going on around you. Don't act like they don't exist. Don't act like all those vices in South Africa don't exist. Be open with your children. Tell them, listen, those people drink alcohol. This is why it's haram. This is why we don't do it. Listen, there are people in this community who commit zina. It's haram because of this, why, that reason. Explain to them the reasons why. Have an open discussion with your children about the vices around them. Let them understand why it is haram and why we don't do it. Another thing that needs to change with our parenting style is we as parents have to understand that our children's understanding of who Allah is stems from their relationship with us. And I mentioned this at the beginning. That if parents are harsh and unforgiving and violent, that is a child's image of God as well. And when parents are kind and loving and merciful and forgiving, that is the image of God as well. And so we represent this religion to our children. We are the first teacher. We are the first model of Islam. And if we are doing a bad job on either direction, either by being too extreme or being too negligent of the religion, either extreme, then we are sending them a wrong message. So parenting is something that needs to change the way we do it, and that's a discussion for another time, inshallah. Another thing that needs to change is a major restructure of the Islamic education system on every level. There are so many gaps in our education system today. Number one, we don't focus on Islamic studies for high school. That's one of our biggest problems. Think about it. Most Muslim children go to madrasa until what, grade 7 or grade 8? Am I right? How many grade 10, 11, how many grade 12 students do you know go for madrasa classes? Probably like less than 10%. And even if they are going, most of the time they're only learning fiqh. But understand, at that age, they are young adults. And they have a lot of deep questions. That's the age where they need a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the age where they need mentors. That's the age where they need righteous friends. That's the age where they need someone to ask their questions to. That's the age where they need to feel connected to the masjid, connected to the community. And that's the age that we ignore them completely and tell them only to focus on school. And so they hit 18, they're not praying 5 times a day, they forgot whatever they learned in madrasa, they go to university, and we wonder what happened to them. So we have to find a way to educate the teenage group, the young adult group, and to make sure that they're getting the right education. Not just an education, but the right education. And the restructuring of our education system has to happen on every level. Even the Alim program itself. It needs to start including things like psychology, counseling, teaching methodology, so that our ulama are equipped to handle the challenges of our times. Alhamdulillah, other countries, they are doing that. Inshallah, South Africa will follow one day. The third solution is we need to allow spaces where our youth can ask questions about Islam without being judged for these questions. Right? Where people can ask questions about Islam without being judged for their questions. And that's what we hope to do with these circles. Right? There's Wednesday nights, every second Wednesday when we get together, and on Fridays we have for teenagers only. By the way, on Fridays we also have a program like this, but it's for teenagers only. The whole purpose of these programs is to give them a space to ask these questions without judgment. Not just teenagers, but young adults as well. That you can come and you can ask. Because again, going back to what I said earlier, if we tell them don't ask questions like that, the question doesn't go away. And shaitan will play on it on their mind until it grows into a major doubt. We rather have spaces where they can ask the questions without judgment, we can discuss topics frankly, and we can give them the answers that they need. The fourth solution is a focus on tazkiyah and akhlaq, on purification of the soul and character. And this goes back to changing our education system. In fact, most of the solutions I'm mentioning are related to the education system. But we have this huge gap in our education that we don't teach children, and specifically teenagers, purification of the soul. Again, how many of us were taught as teenagers how and when to make istighfar, how and when to make tawbah? What type of sins do you say astaghfirullah for, and which type of sins do you make tawbah for? How many of us have taught our teenagers that if you commit a major sin and you make tawbah, Allah will forgive you? How many of us have actually taught them this? How many of us have shown them the way back to Allah when you go off? How many of us have taught them the importance of good company, of having a mentor, of having a spiritual connection with your salah and with your Quran? We don't focus on these things. And if we can adjust our curriculums from a very young age to focus on this, then maybe from the age of 10, we have some level of spirituality in our Islamic studies curriculum, then this can help to shape the iman as they grow. So for example, where the family gets together and prays salah in Jamaat, and where maybe the father recites Quran and translates it and discusses it with his children. Or in the madrasa, where the teacher doesn't just focus on fiqh, but teaches some books on purification of the soul, and teaches the students how do you grow your iman. And again, here we have to be realistic. Again, we have two extremes. We have those who don't focus on this at all, and then we have those who expect a child to be perfect by the age of 15 or 18. We have to understand that spirituality is a journey. It is a lifelong, gradual journey. And everybody moves at a different pace. And some people, by the age of 20, they may not be at the level that their parents wish they were at. But if you are gently helping them move in the right direction, maybe by the age of 30 or 40, they'll get there. But if you shut them down, push them away, write them off, say, oh, my child's not a Muslim, or my child's not a good Muslim, or I'm not going to talk to him anymore, you are closing the doors for them. You are making it harder for them to grow. We expect too much from people at too young age. And what's interesting is even the Sahaba did not expect that from teenagers or from young adults. Now, I think it was Abdullah ibn Abbas who said that youth is madness. And he said, youth is madness. At that age, people do stupid things. And if you look at the people who killed Usman radiallahu anhu, or the people who rebelled against the early Khalifas, many of them were young people. Right? And the Sahaba said they're young, they're immature, they don't understand it, that's why they're doing these things. When you look at people, even amongst the Sahaba who were young, the Prophet ﷺ had a relationship with them where he never expected them to be perfect. They will literally have young Sahaba coming to the Prophet ﷺ and saying, oh Rasulullah, I kissed a girl, what do I do about it? And he'll tell them to pray 2 rakat salah and make istighfar. He didn't expect that level of perfection that we expect today. Instead, he was their spiritual guide, showing them the way back to Allah, showing them the way forward, showing the way to work your way towards Allah. Because let's face it, none of us are perfect, and none of us will ever be perfect. So why do we expect perfection from teenagers and young adults? So let's focus instead on our spiritual development and their spiritual development as well. Then we have one last thing about the education system, and that is we need to update both our fiqh and aqidah curriculums to reflect the needs of our time. And that's one of the things we hope to do with the series, and that's one of the things that I've been working with at Yaqeen Institute, is that we've been working on developing contemporary modules related to both aqidah and fiqh. So what do you mean by contemporary issues related to fiqh? Fiqh in the past, the way we would teach it is we tell children zina is haram, alcohol is haram, salah is compulsory. We need to update it. But update it, I don't mean you change the fiqh. I mean you explain to them in the modules the goals of the Sharia. Why is zina haram? Because of the problems it causes to family. Look at how family is being destroyed in the modern world. Talk about the importance of family. How zina completely destroyed, how zina has completely destroyed that in our lifetime. You show them why it is haram in the fiqh module itself. When you talk about something being compulsory, you don't just tell a child pray 5 times a day. You explain to them the spiritual benefits of praying 5 times a day, the spiritual harms of avoiding the prayer, what it actually does for your soul. So they have a deeper connection with the fiqh. Aqidah even more important, because Aqidah is where we discuss topics like who is Allah? How do we know Allah exists? How do we know the Prophet ﷺ is a true prophet? These are the topics we have to cover in Aqidah. Not fighting over how to interpret Allah's names and attributes. Not fighting over what is the definition of Qadr. Leave those fights for a different time and place. Focus on the questions that the youth have that are causing them to doubt Islam. If we can update our curriculums in schools, in madrasas, in universities, in alim programs, in our weekly programs, then we can build a stronger foundation for our youth. That from the time they are young, they have a strong foundation. They're not just Muslim by name, they are Muslim because they have learned from the very beginning the proofs of Islam. And finally, we end with a reminder that we have to be patient and honest when dealing with these new challenges. Many of us take one of two wrong routes when it comes to dealing with this. We either lie, or it's nothing to do with Islam. We end up lying about our religion, which is completely wrong, because then the child goes online and he Googles and he finds the Quranic verse and he finds the hadith and he realizes that you were wrong, right? And that you lied to them about the religion. And that's why I'm always very brutally honest. Whether it's about history or fiqh or aqidah, I'm very brutally honest. There's no room for lying about your religion when it comes to dealing with these new challenges. Say it as it is, even if it is controversial, right? If something is haram, it's haram. We don't change it because we don't want to face reality. And number two, we have to be patient. We have to have sabr when dealing with people, because everybody is today is dealing with new challenges that we didn't even think about 10 years ago. And it's not going to be fixed overnight. If a teenager comes to you and says that I have doubts about Islam, you're not going to solve that overnight. You have to be very patient with that individual. You have to sit with them for multiple sessions and discuss a variety of issues and deal with a variety of traumas to get to the root of the issue and help them solve their problem. Many of us, we get angry, we get irritated, and we're like, why can't you just believe? Why can't you just be a good Muslim? That's not how it works. That's not the real world. Sabr is necessary when dealing with people. Look at Musa alayhi salam as your example. You look at all the stories of Bani Israel and the sabr Musa alayhi salam had to have with them. Whenever they messed up over and over again, and he kept leading them in the right direction. No matter how many times Bani Israel messed up, Musa alayhi salam kept leading them and kept trying to pull them in the right direction. And that's the relationship we have to have with our students, with our children, with our community members, with anyone who is facing spiritual crises at the moment. So this is it. This is my introduction to this topic. If we can fix these 6 things, right? If we can parent better, fix our education system, decrease the social pressure by improving our children's confidence, help them overcome their desires by teaching them why those things are haram, help them have a connection with Allah so they don't experience a spiritual crisis. If we can fix our community problems, right, we now give them a strong foundation upon which their iman is built. And when that iman is built on a strong foundation, there is less room for doubt. It is far less likely that person will ever apostate or leave the religion. But when the foundation is shaky, when there's no real Islamic education, when there's no evidences taught to them, when there's strong social pressure, when there's disconnection with their parents and with the community, then it becomes very easy for shaitan to get to the heart of a person and take them away from Islam. So this is the roots of the problems. And what we're going to do over the next few Wednesdays, every second Wednesday, is we're going to take one specific question that a lot of young people have today and address it. So inshallah, for example, our next session in 2 weeks' time will be on proofs for the existence of Allah. Because this is the most common question, right? Especially in this age of atheism and agnosticism, we have people asking, how do you know God exists? How can you prove that Allah exists? And I will present to you 3 or 4 ways that Muslims go about proving the existence of Allah, and then focus primarily on the way that I believe is most important and strongest, and the one that solves it easiest. Inshallah. So we'll do that inshallah in 2 weeks' time. With that, we come to the end of this presentation. Open the floor to discussion and to questions and answers. Before we take any questions, raise your hands if you've ever dealt with any of these 6 cases. If you've dealt with someone whose Iman was weak or they left Islam for one of these 6 reasons. Raise your hands if that happened to you. So you believe these points are on point, right? Because a lot of people will tell me that it's nothing to do with this. It's just the individual, right? It's just the individual and his problem. And I feel that's not taking responsibility for our side. Because sometimes we are the cause of somebody else leaving the religion, just like we can be the cause of someone entering the religion. Remember, our existence is da'wah. If we are projecting Islam properly, people will flock to this religion. And if we are portraying Islam poorly, people will leave this religion. Because our existence is da'wah. That's a reality. Whether you want to do da'wah or not, you as a Muslim represent Islam to everybody you interact with, Muslim and non-Muslim alike. Right. Any questions?
Yeah. Well, in my generation, biggest challenge of the day was a political challenge, where Muslims and people of color were living in apartheid. Many Muslims at that point in time joined political movements, and in the process they lost Islam. Numerous examples. One of the things that Muslim Youth Movement and Muslim Students Association was able to do was provide a platform for people to express their political beliefs, and therefore providing platforms for people to express themselves in those particular areas is very, very important. And I think if that didn't actually happen, we would have lost the entire generation of young Muslims, communism, socialism, all the other isms that exist. It's also because of that involvement of MISA that many Muslims were involved in a political struggle on an Islamic basis, using the Muslim platforms and they got into parliament and so on. So that's just one example. I'm trying to think of a similar type of thing that's happening today, where we can provide a similar platform for people to express themselves in particular areas, which is not being done at the moment. I'm just trying to think hard. Maybe you can help me out.
Okay, so it's a good point that in your generation, a lot of Muslims who left Islam left it for political reasons, right? For example, during the apartheid struggle, a lot of people became disillusioned with the ulama who were on the side of the apartheid government, right? And many of them ended up leaving Islam by joining communist movements and other type of movements, right? And what saved them was having a Islamic political platform, a platform where you could be Islamic and political at the same time. That saved the iman of many people. So for this generation, how do we deal with the problems nowadays in South Africa are not necessarily political. It's more moral. That's the bigger issue. What is morality? And that's one of the topics we're going to cover. Because in Islam, our morality is set. And in the modern world, the definition of morality changes every 5 years. And we don't have discussions on these topics. We just assume that everyone's on board with what Islam teaches, and we don't give people a space to express their doubts in this area. What would be needed, I think, over here is as I mentioned, a space where people can ask their questions and deal with the difficult things. So, for example, look at the issue of women's rights. Because we don't have Islamic spaces where women can express their rights in the Islamic way, right? We lost a lot of the current generation of our sisters to feminism. We lost a lot of them to feminism because they don't have access to the masjid, they don't have access to Islamic classes, they don't have a voice in the community, but they found community in feminism. They found a voice in feminism. They found someone who accepts them for who they are in feminism. And we lost them to feminism. So one of the ways to avoid that would be to have a place where they can have a voice, have a presence, and be able to have open, honest discussions about these topics with a strong Islamic foundation that will inshallah protect them from falling in that direction. Okay, any other comments or questions? We have a lot of ulama here today, alhamdulillah, ulama in training. So, any questions?
Just a comment or query. The role of shaitan in the crisis. When there is a vacuum, shaitan fills that. And we tend to disregard the importance of the shaitan influence.
Yes.
How to counteract.
That's a good point. And that goes back to the tazkiyah, right? He mentioned that we forget about, our problem today is we tackle everything rationally and we forget the spiritual element. So when someone's having doubts about Islam, we think about the rational side, the philosophical side. We don't think about the topic of the waswasa of shaitan. Does shaitan have an influence over this person? And that's where the tazkiyah comes in. That if we have this purification of the soul, we can spot waswasa inside ourselves and say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim, and chase it away. There's hadith about this, where the Prophet ﷺ said that shaitan will come to one of you and ask you question after question. Who created this? Who created that? And then shaitan will put into your heart the question, who created Allah? And then Rasulullah said, when you get that question in your heart, simply say, I believe in Allah and His Messenger. Meaning, don't even entertain the waswas of shaitan. Don't even entertain it. Because it's never ending. Okay, you answer that question, shaitan will bring another one. Now you have to understand that something's coming from shaitan. The problem again is, let's be frank, a lot of our Muslims treat shaitan like a myth. They treat it like it's mythology, not like it's actual real jinn whispering into our subconscious. They don't have this understanding of it. And yes, shaitan plays a role. Who does shaitan have an impact on? We say that the wolf catches the lonely sheep. And that goes back to the community problem. That when someone does not have a sense of belonging, when they don't have a sense of community, that's when shaitan tells them, you'll fit in there. You'll fit in there. For that generation, it was the communists and other movements. Today, it's the LGBTQ movement. It's the feminist movement. It's the liberal movement. Shaitan puts in their heart, you know what? These guys are not going to accept you. Those people will accept you. So that's the way the waswasa comes in. And if you don't have a sense of community, and someone firmly and strongly is looking for one, they will be drawn to the wrong community. So this is very, very important when we are educating our youth about purification of the soul, that we discuss the role of the nafs and the role of shaitan and how to counteract them and how to counteract the thoughts that shaitan puts in people's hearts.
Just to follow up on that point, I think a very important point as well is that our masajids now become places of worship, not community centers. And the role of the masjid in the time of the Prophet was that it was a community center. Everything happened there. Today it's closed in between salah. And I don't know if you remember, but many years ago, there used to be notices in masjids, some of them very prominent in masjid, that don't bring children to the masjid because they are disruptive.
They're still there.
I don't know if they're still there.
They're still there.
But I just cannot understand the kind of mentality that goes into this. Because children must be nurtured to come to the masjid and to be attached to the masjid. And here we are actually having notices on the masjid, don't bring the children to the masjid. I remember once praying in a particular masjid in my area where I used to live, and the kids were running up and down. And after Salah, one of the Musallis stood up and scolded them, and scolded the parents. They don't bring the children here, they're disrupting us, and we can't concentrate. And actually embarrass the parents and the children. I think that's a big problem as well. That we spend millions of rands, millions, decorating our masajid, but it only become places of worship, and in fact should be the center of the community. All community activities for children, for our sisters, should all take place in this masjid. So I think that's a big deficit in our community.
That's very true. That's very true, and that fits in with the community problems part of it. The Turks have a saying that if you can't hear the sounds of children playing in the masjid, worry about the next generation. Because children who grow up playing in the masjid, they grow up with their heart attached to the masjid. And for many other countries I visited, there's children's play areas, there's children's playrooms, there's basketball courts, there's coffee shops, all of that in and around the masjid. And we don't have that in South Africa. Problem is, how do we solve it? I mean, we've been talking about it for 20, 30 years now. We need solutions. I think, for me, solutions start not complaining about what other masjids are doing, but focusing on what can we do. And I think what we can do is at least this center to make it an example for everyone else. So other people will see the center, see the halaqas, see the teenage program, seeing everything going on here, seeing the effects it has, and maybe others will be inspired to do the same. It'll have, inshallah, a ripple effect in the community. But instead of us only talking about these things, we have to start taking action. We have to start seeing what is within our control to change. Alhamdulillah, many of you all sitting here, you all either have your own centers or you will have one day, inshallah. You all can do this. You all can at least have that center being a role model for the others. And then people will see it and that will spread throughout the community. And that's the one way that we can change that part, inshallah. That is very, very true. I personally know people who were going to the masjid when they're 5 or 6 years old and got traumatically shouted at in front of everyone in the masjid at the age of 7 or 8. And right till now, at the age of 30s, they are terrified of masjids and people go to the masjid. And they were traumatized from the masjids for life. So instead of attracting people to the house of Allah, we are chasing people away. I mean, even with adults, the other day, I was standing in the masjid talking to my friend. Two grown adults would be standing in the masjid talking to my friend. And two uncles walk up to us, and one shouted him for his pants being below his ankles, and the other shouted me for not wearing a topi. I mean, that's how adults are treating adults in the masjid. Imagine how they're treating children. So we have to change our attitudes toward it. We don't realize, I mean, that didn't really impact me much because alhamdulillah, I have a foundation of knowledge that I can maintain my iman from, and all of us here do. But what about those who are just there for their first day? What about someone who is not practicing Islam and they go to the masjid for their first day saying, okay, I'm going to start practicing Islam today, and someone shouts them for their pants being below their ankles or because they're not wearing topi? What does it have on the impact does it have on that person? And because they don't have that knowledge to say, okay, this person's understanding of Islam is wrong. No, all they're going to think is this place is scary, I'm out of here. Right? So that's a very, very important point you brought up. Okay, we're almost out of time. Any other questions?
My question is on the updating of faith. I was asking you, what is the system that you're going to use, the student can use to update here without terminating the real essence of human that's supposed to be there? You can see out there is too much about teaching and knowledge. Allah was like again can be interminating with faith.
So what would you like to do to it? Like, I must give ideas. I must what's the word? So you just repeat the question. I forgot. I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
I was asking how are we going to do it? How can I update the
curriculum? Yeah. Okay. Well, it starts with one place, right?
In this century, without contaminating it with the Western ideologies.
You mean contaminating your other ideologies?
Sorry?
Yeah. Contemporizing it.
Maybe it's also maybe the word using updating the fiqh is probably not the right word.
Yeah.
It's contextualizing the fiqh to our situation. So the fiqh is fixed. So he's talking about the danger of contaminating.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. You're saying you mustn't contaminate your other ideas, and how do we keep it pure? Okay, so when I'm talking about updating fiqh, there's two sides of it. One is updating the curriculum, which is our curriculum right now is designed for maybe people living 200 years ago, right? It discusses topics which were necessary for them, but it might not be necessary for us. Like I gave the example of the fiqh of hunting. If someone's a hunter, they should study the fiqh of hunting. But the average person in Durban doesn't need to study it. We're not saying it's bad or it's wrong or it's incorrect fiqh. We're just saying that person doesn't need to learn that. But there are other aspects of fiqh that are not taught in schools that the person in this city needs to know. So for example, the fiqh of business, the fiqh of finance, Islamic banking. Everyone growing up in Durban needs to know these things. But we're not taught it at the school or high school level. Right? The average Muslim doesn't know what is Islamic banking, why is it different, why is riba haram, what's the big deal? So when we say updating fiqh, we're not talking about changing the laws of Allah. We're talking about teaching people based on what they need to learn about or what's relevant to their lives. The other aspect of updating fiqh is that in the madhabs, there are certain laws that change from time to time and place to place, right? There is a rule of fiqh found in all the madhabs that the certain laws change with culture. So for example, if we are teaching people in fiqh that that it's compulsory to wear topi, let's just say that. Is it really compulsory to wear topi? Is it? Well, there's a difference of opinion. And this is a difference of opinion. Could we follow the other opinion? Which opinion is stronger? Right? Sometimes that might change, sometimes it might not. But the ulama at least need to have these discussions that some things change from time to time and place to place. So for example, if you look at the concept of TV, of watching television, right? 30 years ago, everyone said haram. Right? Nowadays, many of the same Maulanas who used to say it's haram have their own TV shows where they teach Islam using their own TV channels. Right? Why? They realized that the fiqh has to change, that opinion was a wrong opinion. Right? The same, sometimes it goes the other way. That 50 years ago, everyone said smoking is makruh. Now we all say it's haram. Why? Because we realized we were wrong. We realized we were wrong. Because remember, fiqh is not just Quran and Hadith. Fiqh is very often ijtihad. It's the ulama having to work something out. So for example, just say today something new is invented. Let's just say someone invents, what's something new that's coming soon? The metaverse, right? The metaverse. And they ask, is attending a halaqah in the metaverse permissible? Everyone says, no, it's haram, right? And then 10 years later, someone comes in, but is it really haram? And then they come with another opinion saying, no, it's halal. Are they changing Islam? No, they're just saying that person's opinion, the people before them's opinion was wrong. Because the Quran doesn't talk about the metaverse. Right? It's the same with modern technologies and stuff like that. So sometimes updating fiqh means that maybe some of the fiqh books written in the past 100 years got some things wrong. We're not saying the Quran was wrong or the Hadith was wrong, but something written in the past 100 years is wrong. And maybe we need to reanalyze those things and come up with new conclusions. Right? So for example, if someone says that, to be a good Muslim, you have to wear kurta. Well, we can go back and say, well, if you study the Quran and the Hadith, there isn't anything about that at all. So maybe we got that wrong. As long as your aura is covered, it's fine. You didn't change Islam. You just, your fiqh is different from the generation before you. So that's one aspect where a fiqh will change. But you are right. We also have to be careful. We have to be careful here, because this does become a slippery slope. That if we don't have the right usul, the right principles, then there's too much of change, and then we end up overstepping. We end up changing the laws of Allah. So this is why anyone training to be firstly, the changes must come from ulama. It mustn't come from anybody. It must come from the ulama. Number two, the ulama making these changes must be properly trained in the art of ijtihad. They must learn usulul fiqh, qawaidul fiqhiyah, maqasidul sharia. They must learn and master all of these sciences. Those level ulama have to have these discussions and update the fiqh. So we make sure the updates are within the sharia and not changing the sharia. Understand? Sometimes updating fiqh, it doesn't mean you're changing the sharia. It happens inside the sharia. Right? So for example, in the early Ottoman Empire, they considered coffee to be haram. Does any Muslim consider coffee haram today? Nobody considers haram, right? Because somewhere down the line, people realized that those ulama were wrong. They were wrong to call it haram. Same with the radio. When the radio was first invented, people thought it was magic. The Muslim ulama literally said that this is shaitans and jinns talking. And they say it's haram. Nobody considers the radio haram today, right? So fiqh can change when you realize that maybe a fatwa of the generation before you is wrong. What you can't change is what is clear in the Quran and Hadith. That's where we draw the line. Right? So that's a different discussion. I do have a whole series we did online on usul al-fiqh. If you watch that series, and I have some good books I can recommend for you on that topic. If you read those books, it shows you what is changeable and what is not, and it'll help you to understand where to draw the line when it comes to all this. But I think I'll give you more resources then, inshallah. Okay, I think we can end now. So inshallah, we'll meet again in 2 weeks' time, and we'll then discuss proofs for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any announcements to make before we close out? Okay, we'll read Isha in Jamaat after this. And this Friday night, there is a program for teenagers with Sheikh Bilal. If any of you have teenagers, someone between grades 8 and 12, boys or girls, who you think can benefit, sign them up for it. We try to have it every second Wednesday, every second Friday with a different teacher. So that teen program, inshallah, is for building them up. It's for this tazkiyah and akhlaq and all of that, inshallah, the sense of community. We are working on all of that through that program. So please, if you do have teenagers, sign them up for that. Jazakallah khairan wa akhiru dawana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.